Today's episode is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right below this video. You know, for all of the fear-mongering about Democrats really being socialists, Obama was a Marxist, Bernie is a communist, all of this stuff, you've been seeing it for years. Is it possible that Donald Trump is the most socialist president that we've ever had, or at least in decades? You know, we did a story a year or two ago about, is Donald Trump the first atheist president? We talked about other non-religious presidents or presidents believed to be non-religious. And we talked about the reality that Donald Trump appears to be lying about being religious just to try to placate evangelical voters. It doesn't make Trump a better president not to be religious, but he just might not be religious, despite his claims that he loves the Bible and all of this stuff. Well, what about Trump as a socialist president? Now, to be clear, Trump is not a socialist, but we are talking here about the sort of haphazard definition of socialism and communism that the right likes to wrongly ascribe to the ideas of the left. But there is a long list of the socialization of some elements of the economy by Donald Trump that could arguably make Trump the closest thing we've had to the definition of a socialist president that his supporters tend to ascribe to socialism. Now, you know, to be clear, there's socialism and then there's sort of like social democracy that is sometimes called socialism. I understand that, but let's consider this and use the spectrum because that's really what it is. In terms of government stimulus, which the right loves to call socialism, the first coronavirus relief package was $2.2 trillion in the CARES Act, trillions coming in additional forms, trillions pumped into the market by the Fed. This is way, way, way bigger than the Obama stimulus, which they called socialist. Remember, Obama was a socialist for an $800 billion stimulus bill and for mandating you buy private health insurance from for-profit companies. Bush's bank bailout was about $400 billion. This is like $8 trillion in total. Trump used the Defense Production Act to force General Motors to make ventilators after initial talks broke down over costs. This is heavy government involvement in directing the activities of private industry, something that the right loves to call socialism. In Soviet Russia, the government tells you what kind of bread to make. Trump threatened to condition the sale of TikTok to Microsoft on the U.S. receiving a very big portion of the sale price and said that nobody else thinks about deals this way other than him, straight up saying government will take a cut of a private business deal because why? Because Trump wants a cut. If Barack Obama had ever suggested anything like this, Fox News would have gone bananas for 10 days. Donald Trump has massively expanded direct farm aid from $11 billion in 2017 to more than $32 billion in 2020, all so he could pay off the farmers who were hurt by his trade war. He has socialized a larger portion of agriculture than previous presidents. When Harley Davidson wanted to move some of its manufacturing over to Europe, Trump threatened them with regulating them and taxing them like never before. This is extraordinarily heavy-handed in terms of a government crackdown on a business that the right calls socialist when a Democrat suggests doing it. Trump moved to prop up the local, domestic coal industry. Despite the market deciding it's time to wrap up coal. Coal doesn't make sense. The government is overriding markets to decide which industry will succeed or fail. Wow. And where is the right on this? Trump has also raised the deficit massively. Obama left office with about a $500 billion deficit, down from 1.5 trillion, remember, that deficit, not debt. Trump doubled where Barack Obama left off before coronavirus. And now, obviously, with coronavirus, everything is completely out of control. The right loves to say those socialist Democrats raised the deficit, but it's Trump who's done it historically. Trump, when asked about debt and deficit, deflects and talks about, we've got to build up the military and the wall, and that's going to help the overall economy, which is almost like a modern monetary theory type argument, which is just do the projects and the economy will benefit, except Trump's doing it with the wrong projects. That would make sense to say, improving healthcare and education in the short run might increase the deficit, but we will benefit so much that in the long run, it will actually be deficit negative or deficit neutral. Trump's sort of making that argument, but with the wrong things, like building a wall, as an example. Now, Trump supporters will say Trump didn't want to do any socialism, but he had to do it because of coronavirus for the good of the country. And that's true to a certain degree, but it's what he did nonetheless. A true capitalist would have said, let the businesses fail. If you don't want to fly because of a virus, let the airlines go under. That's not what Donald Trump is doing. It's also the experience of FDR, by the way. I mean, he arguably, somewhat reluctantly, came to some of the policies he came to in order to kind of save capitalism from itself. Now, FDR is seen by some as the most socialist president we've had. Trump has arguably done more. Presidents have to respond to the events of their presidency, that's for sure. You can't remove coronavirus from it. Sort of like imagining Lincoln's presidency without the Civil War, or FDR's presidency without recovering from the Great Depression and World War II. Trump had to deal with coronavirus, but he chose to do it this way. It could have been done other ways. Now, of course, Trump has also done other things that are not socialistic, right? He's deregulated business so business can pollute more, so cars can be less efficient, cut funding to agencies, cut taxes for some people. But despite all of that, by many measures, Trump could still be the most socialistic president in many of our lifetimes. You've got to go back at least to Nixon, who created the EPA, OSHA, boosted regulation, Social Security benefits. Maybe you'd go back to Dwight Eisenhower, who passed the Interstate Highway Act, subsidized mortgages and college tuition, had a 91% top marginal tax rate, despite lots of ways to reduce the effective tax rate. What's the reaction from Trumpists? Absolutely none. They're too busy trying to suppress the vote to actually care about what it is that Donald Trump is doing. Weird times we live in, my friends. There's a very interesting new poll from the Wall Street Journal about this upcoming election. And it's interesting, not because it says Biden is ahead by 9. We have many polls that say that, and it may be true. If we see the margin of error, Biden plus 9 might really mean Biden plus 2. That's nothing new here. What's interesting about this new poll is that it breaks down Trump versus Biden along a number of different voting groups. And when you look at it, when you slice and dice the electorate, you see that Donald Trump is winning among men, barely, 47-43. That's interesting because Republicans tend to win among men by more than 4 points. We'll talk about that more on Friday. Trump is winning among white voters, barely, 49-47. And Donald Trump is winning among people with high school or less education by a huge margin, nearly 20 points. Trump is up 54-36 among what are colloquially called the uneducated. Now, every single other group, Donald Trump is losing. Some examples include black voters. Biden's up 88-80, brutal. People with postgraduate degrees, Biden is up 65-28. People who are college graduates, Biden is up 61-31. Among women and among Hispanic voters, Biden has 57% support. And importantly, among independents, Biden is up 24, 49-25. Now, when you see this, you have to consider whether some of these things are causal or correlated. So, for example, the more education you have, the more likely you are to vote Biden. We see that, right? High school or less, Biden has 36% support. If you have some college, Biden has 47% support. If you graduated college, Biden's support goes up to 61. And if you have a postgraduate degree, Biden is up even higher to 67. I believe this is causal. I don't think this is merely correlation. Donald Trump's campaign has been objectively one of lying to voters about things he could never possibly do as president, And many people fell for voting for Trump. That's the right terminology. Not everybody, but many people did. More education makes you less likely to vote for a candidate like Trump. And I would argue for Republicans more broadly. So in this case, if you want people to vote for Trump, you actually benefit from hurting education, not funding public schools, not dealing with the student lending crisis, so on and so forth. So you really have to look at this stuff and understand the link to campaign strategy and platforms. There are ideologically based positions that politicians will take or parties will go in the direction of, but there are also self-preservation directions. Are Republicans against education because some of them see it as anti-religious indoctrination? Sure, yeah, that exists among some right-wing voters, but a lot of right-wing voters recognize that the more educated people are, the less likely they are to vote for them. And so that's really important to look at. Now, one last word of caution. Biden +9 in this poll, 2.5 months before the election, is exactly where Hillary Clinton was in this poll 2.5 months before the 2016 election. That's all that needs to be said. Trust nothing other than your ability to vote and to convince others to vote. That's it. We are coming up on the David Pakman Show's 15th anniversary on August 23rd. On that day, we will be sending out to everybody on our newsletter a huge membership special, the goal being to have our best month ever for new memberships this month because it is our 15th anniversary. To be notified of that special on the 23rd, simply subscribe to my newsletter for free at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. And you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Jenny Rose and Michael Pennington. Also want to say thanks to today's longtime sustaining member of the day. That's Gary Urbanowski. Gary has been a member for almost 5 years and is today's sustainer of the day. Join these great people by grabbing a membership in under a minute at joinpakman.com. And you will get, if you want, you don't have to watch, nobody can force you to listen, but you will have available the daily bonus show for our members only. Hey, this is sort of funny. Donald Trump did a press briefing over the weekend, once again at his Bedminster golf club. And much like last weekend, some of his supporters who were guests at the club were allowed to go to the briefing. And it's another example of Trump generating these sort of rally-like atmospheres with friendly crowds, even though he's supposed to be seriously briefing America and the press about that thing called the coronavirus pandemic, which killed 7,000 people in the last 6 days. It's sort of like a rally atmosphere with his supporters cheering in the background. It's weird. But the crazy thing is that even the friendly crowd and the cheering couldn't make Trump look sensible, and he instantly fell apart, even in front of a friendly crowd. So let's look at some of the clips. Trump started by talking about how cases are going down despite testing, which continues to expose that Donald Trump is very, very confused about how testing relates to cases. And by the way, there were 55,000 cases the day before Trump did this press briefing. Listen to what Donald Trump had to say.
Nearly 85% of jurisdictions all across our country are reporting a very steep decline in cases. And that's despite the fact that we have the #1 testing program anywhere in the world. We're up to almost 70 million tests, far beyond any other country. This week, cases nationwide have declined by 6%.
So, of course, Trump doesn't get it. More testing reduces cases over the long term because people know they have it. They know they're contagious. They stay home. That ship has sailed. He's just not going to understand that, or he's refusing. He's at least pretending not to understand that. So then it starts to get ugly very quickly. Trump here suggests that the numbers on the virus are so good that he must win. In other words, how could a president who has such great numbers on the virus not be reelected? That's where Donald Trump's mind is.
Iran would love to have me defeated. If I win, which I hope to win, how can you not when you see numbers like this, both on the virus and on the economy? I mean, we should win. We should all be keep this incredible thing going. And I built it once and I'll build it again. I've already, I think the hardest part is done in terms of the economy. And that's with or without additional funds.
Remember that as a country, we have the 8th most cases per capita in the world. If you don't include tiny countries, which can throw off the data, the U.S. has the 6th most cases per capita in the world. In terms of deaths, we have the 10th most deaths per capita in the world. Again, if you exclude places like San Marino and Andorra, because they have tiny populations where just a few deaths per capita is very high. If you exclude those, we are 8th worst in the world in terms of per capita deaths. And Trump says, how could you not reelect a president with numbers so good? And at the end there, you might have heard Trump start to say, we're doing great with or without stimulus money. Like Trump seems to be suggesting here that the second stimulus, which is being debated right now, it may not even be necessary. Things are just fine, which just shows how disconnected he is from reality. He's asked about that specifically, and here he says it. We can do it or not do the second stimulus. Either way is fine. For him, I guess he means.
Listen to me. Listen to me. My people are doing very good. And my people call me. They're in the office. They call me. They call me when it's right. Nobody knows the deal better than I do. When it's right, I'll meet. But right now, it's not right. They want $1 trillion to bail out badly run states. They're Democrat. They're Democrat states. Will something happen? Possibly. But I want to tell you, the country is doing very well right now. We can live very happily with it, without it. But I'd like to do it because I want to give money to the people.
I like how Trump says we can be happy with or without another stimulus. Record unemployment, highest GDP drop on record last quarter, businesses still not functioning fully, schools closed or going remote increasingly as the virus spreads. But Trump is fine with or without a second stimulus. Good to know, right? I'm glad he's fine with it either way. Trump is then asked about polling, which doesn't look particularly good for him. And Trump is just rambling about there are lots of boaters, people with boats who like Trump and have Trump flags on their boats.
Lakes, rivers, and oceans, thousands and thousands of boats. It's called Boaters for Trump, Boaters for Trump Pence. There's signs all over. Some of the boats have 10 flags on them. They're incredible. There are thousands. We did nothing to do this. This is just generic. It just happened.
The thing is that, the white Florida boat owner demographic isn't enough to win it for Trump. He may have enough to win it. That's important. But the boaters in the intercoastal are not enough to win it for Donald Trump. And here again, Trump goes into the stuff about mail-in voting, saying we might not know the results of the November election, not for days, not for weeks, not for months. We might not know it for years.
We are going to have an election that takes place on a beautiful day, November 3rd. And usually at the end of the evening, they say, Donald Trump has won the election. Donald Trump is your new president. Whatever they say, you know what? You're not going to know this, possibly, if you really did it right, for months or for years. Because these ballots are all going to be lost. They're going to be gone. And just take a look at a smaller basis. But It's great tests. We're doing tests. I mean, these are, you could call them polls, you could call them tests. Look at what's happening all over the country where you have universal mail-in. Wait a minute. The ballots are lost. There's fraud. There's theft. It's happening all over the place. Now, we're going to do it with this whole vast, big section of the country. It's crazy.
Think about how insanely hyperbolic that is. All the ballots will be lost, and we won't know who won for years. Consider how ridiculous that is. On what planet would we not know the election results for years? And by the way, does Trump know that if that happens, he stops being president on January 20th? It's not clear that someone has actually said that to Donald Trump. And of course, realistically, if there are a lot of mail-in ballots and they have to be postmarked by Election Day, could take a few days to get counted. It might take a few days to have the final results. And if it's really close, we might not know who is going to be president in January until like November 8th. That's not the worst thing in the world. Let's get it right. In many countries, you don't know the results at midnight. We think that we should. That doesn't have to be the way it is. Then Trump is asked about birtherism 2.0, which is about Kamala Harris. Is Kamala really eligible to be president? Trump has a chance to denounce it, but he does not.
Campaign. Will you say now that Kamala Harris is eligible to run and be vice president or president based on being born in Oakland, California?
So I have nothing to do with that. I read something about it, and I will say that he is a brilliant lawyer, that I guess he wrote an article about it. So I know nothing about it, but it's not something that bothers me.
But, sir, when you do that, it creates...
Why do you say that? I just don't know about it, but it's not something that we will be pursuing. Let me put it differently.
President, you know.
Let me put it differently. Don't tell me what I know. Let me put it differently. To me, it doesn't bother me at all. I don't know about it. I read one quick article. The lawyer happens to be a brilliant lawyer, as you probably know. He wrote an article saying there could be a problem. It's not something that I'm going to be pursuing.
Is she eligible, sir?
I just told you. I have not gone into it in great detail. If she's got a problem, you would have thought that she would have been vetted. You would have thought that she would have been vetted by Sleepy Joe. Yeah, go ahead.
He's like, I don't know much about this, but the guy who wrote the article questioning whether Kamala can be VP, because to be VP, you have to be eligible to be president. That guy's brilliant. That guy's credentials are super, super good. And you'd think Joe Biden would have vetted her, but I don't know anything about that. Birtherism 2.0 is building, and it's arguably going to continue building if other strategies don't go well. Here, Trump does what I call the Sir routine. The Sir routine is, we have a name. It's crazy that we have a name. The Sir routine is when Trump retells a story of someone saying something to him that is advantageous to him. And he'll say, they came to me and they said, sir, blah, blah, blah. You can almost guarantee it didn't happen the way Trump claims it happened when he does the Sir routine.
I want to say that I want college football to come back. These are strong, healthy, incredible people. These are people that want to play football very badly. A great talent quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, called me on 2 days ago. I spoke to him a couple of times. He said, sir, I want to just tell you we want it back. We want to play. And he's an incredible quarterback, as you know, from an incredible school, Clemson. And he's going to have a very good future in the NFL.
Sir, they told me, they came to me, sir, please start college football. Okay. Some quick ones here. Donald Trump still continues to refer to the 1918 flu pandemic as happening in 1917.
Do you agree with Dr. Robert Redfield, who earlier this week said if America doesn't follow public health guidelines, we could be in store for one of the worst falls we've ever faced from a public health perspective?
No, I mean, you can't compare it to 1917. That was incredible. That was the worst ever by far. That was, you look at they lost possibly 100 million people. No, I don't agree with that. But
weirdly, Trump says that some people call his own Secretary of Defense Mark Jesper as opposed to Mark Esper. Just like a very weird moment.
With your Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, do you have confidence in his leadership there?
Mark Jesper? Did you call him Jesper? Oh, okay. Some people call him Jesper. No, I get along with him. I get along with him fine. He's fine.
And then here again, it's that raucous atmosphere that Donald Trump loves. Even if it's supposed to be a serious press briefing, he actually suggests that he might fire his entire cabinet if he gets reelected. He then dissembles into rambling and walks off the stage to the applause of his club-going, mostly mask-wearing sycophants.
Mr. President, when you're talking,
Go ahead.
as far as your cabinet goes, do you think you'll see more turnover in your cabinet?
Well, I don't know. I think for next year, I mean, generally speaking, a lot of times I understand if we win, President will ask for the resignation of everybody and then bring back the people he wants. That's happened before, Steve. And I could see something like that happening. I think that makes sense. No, I have a very good cabinet. I mean, with few exceptions. I wouldn't say I'm thrilled with everybody, frankly. But overall, I think we have a very good cabinet.
So can you mention?
I will say this. No administration, none. No administration, first 3.5 years, has done anywhere near what we've done. 300, we will have at the end of the first term, 300, maybe more, federal judges, including Court of Appeals, 2 Supreme Court justices. Nobody has done this. Take a look at what we've done. The biggest tax cuts in history, biggest regulation cuts in history, rebuilt our military, took care of our vets. We have a 91% approval rating from the vets. Nobody's ever had a 91% approval rating before. I guarded the Second Amendment. They want to destroy the Second Amendment. Take a look at Kamala. They want to destroy the Second Amendment. And as you know, Joe has no control over anybody. He has no control over himself. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
That's considered, in 2020, among Trumpists, a coronavirus press briefing from the President of the United States, as if it's a serious thing. The cheering is just too much. I would love to interview the people there right after they're done cheering and Trump walks off. What made you cheer? What exactly were you cheering for? What did you hear from the president that you liked so much that made you cheer as he walked off stage? And I've said before, even in friendlier and friendlier settings, Trump is on Fox and Friends, a friendly setting, and it goes terribly. I'll talk about that later. Trump is on Hannity. It's his friend. And even Hannity can't make Trump look good. A press briefing at his own club with his supporters cheering, and he still looks like he has absolutely no idea what's going on. There is no setting friendly enough that can make Donald Trump look good at this point in time. We're going to have more coverage of this on our Instagram page, which is David Pakman Show on Instagram. You can also follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Coming up next, so much more. Very busy day as the Democratic National Convention gets started tonight. I will be streaming starting at 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So Donald Trump is very worried about the attention that the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, is going to get this week. And one of the things they're doing is having campaign advisors kind of manage expectations. Trump campaign advisors are floating the idea that Joe Biden might get an 8 to 10 point bump this week from the DNC. Now, that's extremely unlikely, but the idea is if they say Biden could get 8 to 10, when Biden gets 3 or 4, which is typical from a convention, they can say, oh no, Biden underperformed. Nobody likes him. We expected him to get 8 to 10 points, but he only got 3 or 4. So they're doing that. Trump's flying to multiple cities this week to do rally-like events, which we'll be covering separately, so I won't spend a ton of time on that right now. And in addition to this, Donald Trump is also doing a bunch of interviews. He's doing a bunch of press, and he started off the week on Fox and Friends again, and it went really badly. Before we start with the politics, I want to start with the strangest moment. Donald Trump's younger brother, Robert Trump, tragically passed away over the weekend in his early 70s. Trump, of course, struggles to show any emotion or human connection. Asked about it, Trump says, "They say Robert was my best friend," which is really weird language to use about your supposed best friend and brother. Take a look at this bizarre video.
Listen, a lot of people have been thinking about you and your family over the weekend. I know you were able to get to the hospital before your brother Robert died here in New York City. We are so sorry for your loss.
Well, I appreciate it. It was not a great weekend. It's very hard. You knew it was going to happen, but still, when it happens, it's a very tough thing. He was a great guy. He was a tremendous guy. He was my friend. I guess they say best friend, and that's true. And, losing him, not easy.
That is really, really strange language. I guess they say he was my best friend, and I guess that's true. What I think is that the statement that was put out by the White House quoting Trump saying he was my best friend, Trump didn't really write it, and Trump didn't really say it. So when Trump says they say he was my best friend, he really means the people who wrote the statement attributing that quote to me, they said he was my best friend. And I guess he sort of was. And then lastly, Trump is asked again about his late brother, Robert Trump. And Trump's sort of eulogy was about Robert Trump wasn't jealous of my success, and he thought I was a great president. Like, it's all about Trump, if you can believe that.
Most loyal people. There was no jealousy. A lot of times in families, I hate to say it, but there's jealousy, and especially among children and among children that are competitive children, because he was very competitive. There was not an ounce of jealousy. He'd go around talking about how great this is for the country, and it's so incredible. And he was my biggest fan. People would tell me all the time, I spoke to your brother, and your brother was so thrilled and so thrilled at what was happening. And what was happening for the country was he was so angry with China because of what happened where the plague came in and they shouldn't have allowed it to happen. They could have stopped it. He was so upset by that. He couldn't, more than people would be upset. A lot of people have already forgotten, and you can't forget. But he was a fantastic guy.
Well, we're very sorry for your loss. And
well, thanks.
Asked about his brother, who died 2 days earlier, Trump says he was loyal to me. He wasn't jealous of all of my great success. He was mad at China because of the plague, and he thought I was doing a great job. This is not a person with normal emotion or with normal emotional connections to others. So that's out of the way. Let's now get into the political stuff. Trump again just insisting everything's fine with the virus, and says without his border wall, which Mexico was going to pay for but didn't, and which he was going to build across the entire U.S.-Mexico border but didn't, he says without that border wall, things would be much worse, which is ridiculous. Take a look.
border wall. But can I ask you something about New York
Well, no,
City?
then you shouldn't let it be in office, because we would have right now the plague coming in. Like, those 280 miles I built have stopped like hundreds of thousands of people. Mexico is heavy COVID territory. They're highly infected. I built the wall. And that wall has stopped people from coming in. If she said that, and I know Sleepy Joe said it, he said, we should stop the wall, and I might even tear down the wall. He wants to tear down a wall that's the best border wall ever built in terms of the success of it.
So you really hear that manic energy from Trump shot out of a cannon, as I say. And to add some facts to this, Trump says if it weren't for his 280 miles of wall, which is like nothing, by the way, we would have hundreds of thousands of additional cases coming in from Mexico. The numbers just don't bear this out. Number one, in total cases, Mexico has 10% of the cases that we do. Now, Mexico has fewer people. That's true. So per capita, the U.S. is 8th in cases and Mexico is 57th. That's per capita. Now, that can depend on testing. Well, in the U.S., we are 10th in deaths per capita. Mexico is 13th in deaths per capita. So it's a complete fantasy world. Fox and Friends allows it completely uncritically. Then Trump starts to insist that the world is calling him because he's so good at dealing with Turkish President Erdogan. Nobody knows how to deal with Erdogan other than Trump. Trump tooting his own horn here. Take a look.
Call me up. They need help with Turkey. The heads of countries last week, they called me up. Could you call Erdogan? I said, why? You're the only one that he'll listen to. He doesn't listen to us. You're the only one. I said, is that because of the United States? He says, no, that's because of you. That's because of your personality. You're the only one that he will listen to.
What about...
And you know what? I don't like saying this publicly, but it happens to be true. I get along with him, and he listens. And
is this maybe the most narcissistic thing that we've heard Donald Trump say? Then Trump compares the Taliban to the hosts of Fox and Friends interviewing him in this interview. This is weird.
Reconstituting in Afghanistan, though.
And you couldn't, if you look at her issues, you couldn't be more different.
Well, then I'll take them out, Brian. If they're reconstituting, I'll take them out. But we had at one point more than 100,000 soldiers. That's ridiculous. And we're ready to do whatever we have to do. We're dealing with the Taliban. I said, look, let me tell you something. And I've dealt with them directly. These are tough people. They're like you people. Maybe not that tough. But you know what? These are tough people. I said, look, if you play games, we're going to come and we're going to hit you harder than any country in the history of the world has ever been hit.
I guess maybe for Trump, this counts as adopting a sense of humor. I don't even know what's going on. Trump continues to be unable to pronounce Kamala Harris's name correctly. Now, that may not change. While he continues to allude to the Joe Biden dementia stuff, he still can't say Kamala's name.
Maybe people are going to feel sorry for him and maybe it wouldn't, but our country is too important for that. You're dealing with people that are very sharp. You're dealing with world-class chess players in the leaders of these countries. I know them all. We do very well with all of them. Erdogan of Turkey, all of them. You can't have a guy that's shot. You can't have a guy that doesn't know where he is. You can't have a guy that's afraid to leave his basement because he can't speak any longer. And by the way, in his best day, he wasn't good. You know that. He was not the guy. But we're now talking about a bad time. And you can't do that. You can't feel sorry for him and vote for him. And because if that means then the Kamala Harrises are going to take over, and she's a disaster. Look at her positions on everything.
Kamala, of course, is a fictional drug in the series Battlestar Galactica. Joe Biden's running mate is Kamala Harris. Then Trump is asked about people claiming that he might not leave office if he loses in November. And what's amazing about this is Trump doesn't deny it. He's asked, well, what about the people saying you're not going to leave in November? He just bashes Hillary. Hillary's not even the person he's running against this time around.
Mr. President, your reaction?
Well, the first thing I think of is crooked Hillary Clinton when during one of the debates she asked whether or not I would leave office. Would I accept the results of the election? Do you remember? Would you accept the results? Mm-hmm. And I gave her a decent answer. And the problem is she didn't accept it. She went crazy. She's still going crazy. I mean, she's gone nuts. And so have they. I mean, they call it Trump derangement syndrome. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly close. I go by the election. Now, with that being said, I have to tell you that if you go with this universal mail-in where you send millions of votes, in California, tens of millions of ballots being sent to everybody and their dogs, okay? Right. The dogs are getting them, okay?
Not exactly inspiring confidence that Donald Trump will leave peacefully. Again, I believe he will leave, but I believe he will do it if he loses by claiming it was rigged, possibly catalyzing and coalescing his supporters to real world violence out in the streets. I think it could get very, very ugly. And we need to be prepared for that as much as we need to be prepared for the voter suppression and everything else that is going on. Case in point, the post office now says there are tens of millions of ballots at risk. And that's what I want to talk about next. So you've heard me say it. This is not a rehearsal. This is the emergency. The Postal Service says tens of millions of ballots, mail-in ballots, absentee ballots are at risk of not being counted. The United States Postal Service is warning that 46 states and Washington, D.C., in July, they warned tens of millions of voters might not have their votes counted because of the slow mail processing of absentee ballot applications and eventual ballots. That in April, Washington Post has the story. That was the earliest sign from the post office that if they do kneecap them in terms of funding, which the Trump administration is trying to do, it could affect ballot delivery. Now, I really need people to understand this because Donald Trump and Trumpists are saying something very different. The problem here is not the volume of ballots. OK, please look at the numbers. Every holiday season, November, December into New Year, the post office regularly handles about 1.3 billion greeting cards around the country. OK, even if every voter voted by mail, we're looking at somewhere between 120 and 130 million people voting. That's only 10% of the normal volume of greeting cards. OK, if we just let the post office do its thing, it would have no problem handling mail-in ballots, even if every ballot was by mail instead of in person. But that's not going to be the case. Only some people are planning to vote absentee or vote by mail. The problem is if you cut hours, if you limit overtime, if you close down post offices, if you shut down mailboxes, if you, quote, reorganize the post office the way Louis DeJoy wants to do, you will then cause a problem for the post office being able to deliver and do everything that they have to do. The warning from the post office applies to 186 million potential voters. Now, not all of those voters are expected to vote by mail. So that's why in practice, it will probably affect tens of millions rather than, 186 million, which is the number of people that could vote in some of these states. It's in blue states. It's in red states. It's in battleground states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. So there's a few suggestions here that are just common sense. I'm going to have a story tomorrow, by the way. This is, I'll mention it. This is crazy. My absentee ballot application took 14 days to go 3 miles. OK, I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. But as far as suggestions, request your ballots as early as you can. Return your ballot as early as you can. It likely will be too late for some people in some states. Like it seems that we've reached post office kneecapping escape velocity, for lack of a better term. We are unfortunately looking at a situation where if you want higher confidence that your vote will be counted, you might have to vote in person. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not suggesting anybody do anything unsafe, but I'm talking about wearing a mask and all of that stuff. What I am saying is we're hearing from the post office itself that they are being sabotaged, as William Shatner says. And this administration is trying to find a way for your vote not to count. Now, there is some intermediate good news, and this made some waves over the weekend, and I do want to amplify it. In a lot of places, if you get your ballot in the mail, you don't have to send it in through the mail. You can drop it off, and different municipalities have different places, town hall, city hall, different municipal offices. Figure out the specifics in your community. In other places, if it's 10 days before the election and you don't have your ballot, for example, you might have to vote in person to make sure your vote is going to be counted. And that's horrifying. I don't want to pretend that that's not a possibility, but because it is. Trump is against funding the post office. His postmaster general has reassigned 23 postal executives and is sort of circling the wagons and consolidating power. They are talking about the post office like it's a business when really it's a public service. You don't say we can't do it. You say, okay, what do we have to do to make sure that they can do it? That's what a normal president would do. This president says, let's make sure that they can't do it. So really keep in mind that this local drop-off might be a good idea. I checked in Boston. How does it work in Boston? In Boston, the election website says, if you want to return your ballot in person, you can do that anytime City Hall is open, but you've got to go to City Hall. Now, doesn't seem ideal that anybody, all of Boston, needs to go to City Hall to return their ballots in person, but it is something. In New York City, I found that, quote, all borough offices are equipped with ballot marking devices available for voters up until Election Day. Look it up in your community. Remember, they want to take everything away from government. So making the post office fail at something as natural as just delivering ballots is part of them building up the case that we should be replacing the post office with private industry anyway. And they have the added benefit this time around that they might be able to win an election if they're able to do it. Very scary. I want to say this is being taken as seriously as it should. I don't know if it is. I'm doing everything I can to sound the alarm. know the options, understand the timelines, figure out where you can drop off your absentee ballot in person. If you're able, if you have transportation and you're able to do it, very, very important stuff, because this could get really ugly really quickly.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hey, so I have something interesting for you guys right now, because it is yet more Trump flunky gaslighting on corporate media, but it's also a super important kind of critical thinking and epistemology concept. And it goes to the question of Mayo-brained Mark Meadows didn't think he was going to be instructive, but how do we know things? We do observation. We sometimes generalize. We look to authorities. We apply research methods, the scientific method. It's a very big conversation. But when we're dealing with empirical questions that you're not testing in a sort of double-blind format, we need to apply some other concepts, which we are going to discuss shortly. And this leads us to Donald Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who went on CNN and talked about the supposed voter fraud of vote by mail that Trump is going to be pushing to suppress vote by mail this election. And Jake Tapper from CNN points out there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud when people vote by mail. And Mark Meadows says, well, there's no evidence that there isn't widespread voter fraud. Take a look at this.
Sending ballots out just based on a voter roll registration. Anytime you move, you'll change your driver's license, but you don't call up and say, hey, by the way,
of widespread voter fraud, though.
But
there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud.
There's no evidence that there's not either. That's the definition of fraud, Jake. When we look at that, what we have seen are a number of mail.
So this is really instructive. Like, not only does Mark Meadows' skull seem to be filled with mayonnaise here, or veganese, if that's your preference, this leads us to Occam's razor. Occam's razor is a concept which we often interpret or simplify as, if you have competing explanations for something, we should prefer the simpler explanation in the sense that it requires the fewest assumptions and fewest secondary explanations of either unknown or invisible phenomena. So I'll give you some examples. If I say that car seems to be running, I hear it running and the tachometer says 1,000 RPM, I believe the car has gasoline in it, assuming it's not an electric car, right? You could come out and say, you don't know that, David. The car could be out of gas, but you're hearing a speaker pumping out noise that sounds like an engine that's running, and the tachometer might have been manipulated to show 1,000 even when the car isn't really on. Okay, I mean, I guess that's possible, but it's implausible. And the first explanation, which is when you see a car, you hear the noise of the car running and the tachometer shows 1,000, the car probably has gas. It requires fewer assumptions, and the person suggesting the wacky hypothesis should have to provide evidence that they are right. You could say, David, you don't have proof that my theory is false, but intuitively we know that that's the person that should be proving to us that we should consider their hypothesis. Another example, if I say, look, it's an empty room, you could say, there could be an invisible tiger in here. And I'd say, well, if there was an invisible tiger in here, we would still hear the tiger. The tiger might smell. We might see the tiger moving around dust as it walks around. And you could say, no, the tiger is invisible, but it's also odorless and weightless and silent. It doesn't make any noise. And you don't have proof that that's not going on. I think you get the idea. These are indefeasible arguments. You can't defeat them because they will always say, well, you haven't proved otherwise definitively. Jake Tapper, of course, should have said, you're asserting something for which there is no evidence. So the onus is on you to prove it. Simply saying, it hasn't been proven that there isn't voter fraud is not actually sufficient. Now, it gets even crazier during this interview. Here, Mark Meadows claims that despite numerous reports, no voting machines have been taken offline. But if they were taken offline, it's definitely Barack Obama's fault.
Are you saying that sorting machines have not been taken offline and removed? Are you asserting that did not happen?
I'm saying that sorting machines between now and the election will not be taken offline. Listen, I had Postal under my
the ones that have been taken offline in the last couple of months.
No, but listen, here's what I'm saying is, when you look at it, the normal process of doing all of this, Jake, I had the postal system under. I had the only bipartisan bill to actually deal with the $146 billion loss that the Postal Service has been will see over the next 10 years. And so when you're looking at this, these postal machines and the drawdown, that was a 2006 bill that has been implemented that I don't necessarily agree with, but that's not this Postmaster General that did that. That was the previous Postmaster General under Obama.
So if you're struggling to understand that, you aren't alone. Do not adjust your brain. It's actually incoherent. Voting machines haven't been taken offline, but there was a bill under Obama to do it, but it hasn't happened this time. But it did happen, but not now. So if it's because of that bill that you see it, then blame Obama. What? Then Jake Tapper provides evidence that actually voting machines are being taken offline. And Mark Meadows says, oh, it's all normal and nothing to be alarmed about. But remember, he said minutes earlier that it wasn't happening at all.
In terms of the fact check that you asked me to look into, one of my great producers did in terms of the machines. Chris Bentley, president of the National Postal Mail Handlers Union Local 297, which covers Kansas and part of Missouri, two good Trump states, told CNN that postal management has already taken out 4 machines in Kansas City, 2 machines in Springfield, Missouri, and 1 machine in Wichita, Kansas. That is earlier this year under this new Postmaster General.
No. With all due respect, and if we look at it, I can talk to Kansas, I can talk to Tucson, Arizona. You're talking to someone who knows is when we take out those processing, they're part of a processing center that comes in, and as we start to move those out, if they were not part of an already scheduled reallocation, it's not happening. It's not a new initiative by this Postmaster General. And when we look at this, it's all about efficiency, but you have a normal system of changing it out. And so with all due respect of your fact checker, I'll be glad to come in. We can spend an hour talking about this. We'll bore people to death. But I can tell you this, the post office has been losing money for over 10 years.
Okay, so the full explanation is this isn't happening. If it is, it's Barack Obama's fault, not the current Postmaster General. But since it is happening, it's actually not happening now. Oh, well, no, but it is. But it was the previous Postmaster General whose influence is actually what's responsible here. And anyway, we should treat the post office like a business instead of the public service that it is. This is Trump's chief of staff. This is not some random congressman anymore. He was some random congressman. Now this is Donald Trump's chief of staff. We're in real trouble heading into this election. In a move of total desperation, Donald Trump has announced that he is now going to consider pardoning Edward Snowden in a completely obvious gambit to maybe try to take control of the election and appeal to some voters. And this is super interesting, partially because Donald Trump previously called for Edward Snowden to be executed. It's also partially interesting because it's not clear whether this would actually help Donald Trump. So let's take it from the top. Edward Snowden is the former NSA contractor who's been living in Russia for years to escape prosecution here in the United States for leaking classified documents that exposed that the NSA and the government, other government agencies, were doing this mass bulk surveillance. Trump was asked about Edward Snowden over the weekend, and here's what he had to say.
Go ahead. Do you want to give Edward Snowden a pardon and bring him back? You once suggested that.
Well, I'm going to look at it. I mean, I'm not that aware of the Snowden situation, but I'm going to start looking at it. There are many, many people. It seems to be a split decision. That many people think that he should be somehow treated differently, and other people think he did very bad things. And I'm going to take a very good look at it. Okay? I mean, I've seen people that are very conservative and very liberal, and they agree on the same issue. They agree both ways. I'm going to take a look at that very strongly, Edward Snowden. Yeah, please.
So in Trump's mealy-mouthed and confused way, he's saying, yeah, he's going to look at pardoning Edward Snowden. Now, remember that Donald Trump previously said in a tweet, quote, Snowden is a spy who should be executed. But if it and he could reveal Obama's records, I might become a major fan. Trump tweeted about Edward Snowden. Snowden is a traitor and a disgrace. Make no mistake, he is no hero. In fact, he is a coward who should come back and face justice. Trump tweeted, Snowden is a liar and a fraud. Trump tweeted, like it or not, Edward Snowden is a spy and should be tried as a spy. He has stolen invaluable information and damaged us with other nations. Trump a second time with the execution of Snowden, tweeting, Snowden is a spy who has caused great damage to the U.S. A spy in the old days when our country was respected and strong would be executed. Trump tweeted hilariously, message to Edward Snowden, you're banned from Miss Universe unless you want me to take you back home to face justice. So I could go on. Trump has 45 tweets about Snowden. But the point is, Trump could not have been more against Snowden for year after year after year until now. And to be clear, the problem here is not that Trump might change his mind. Changing one's mind is good. You learn something new, you reevaluate your position, and your belief might be modified. That's a beautiful thing. We should applaud that rather than ridicule it. The issue here is Trump hasn't learned anything other than maybe pardoning Snowden would help me in November. Trump says in his answer, I don't know much about him, but I'm going to look at a pardon. Trump hasn't become informed about Snowden and now thinks maybe we pardon him. Trump hasn't suddenly come out against the surveillance that Snowden exposed. It's merely Trump thinking, could this help me in November? Maybe it could. He barely has an idea who Edward Snowden is or what he did, unless Putin has been talking to him about it, which would be another situation altogether. So what Trump means by I'm going to take a look at it is I'm going to think about whether it might win me some votes in November. That's absolutely all that this is. Hey, this is really funny. We have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P, and a Trump voter was not pleased with one of our videos from last week that went viral because I was in a different location last week and he didn't like the size of my microphone. Take a listen to this.
Yeah, I stumbled across your show. You were commenting on Donald Trump and the Hannity show, so on and so forth. I think it's pretty weak. It just sounds so weak, man. Put a picture on the wall from your parents' bedroom there. It's pretty drab. And you got a big giant microphone. What the hell? Who are you, man? You're weak. All right. Keep going. Keep going, man. We'll just follow the commenting as you guys lose the election again. All right. See you later.
All right. See you later. It's funny when people call in, they take the time, they've clearly watched enough to issue a very specific critique. They call in to tell me how unimportant and lame everything I'm doing is. And their criticism is the size of my microphone and the fact that I didn't have the place I was broadcasting from last week sufficiently decorated to their standard. You know, it's if you want to talk about a weak criticism, that's what it sounds like to me. But I love it. I love it. We had 200 new voicemails over the weekend, still going through them, and a lot of action, a lot of action. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. We are racing to 1 million YouTube subscribers. Make sure that you get our daily audio podcast on any platform which you prefer, whether it's Spotify, Pandora, Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio. What else is there? Stitcher. Anyway, we've also got a great bonus show coming up for you today, and I invite you to grab a membership at joinpacman.com to get instant access to today's bonus show. Thanks so much for watching today's full episode of the show. Just a reminder, today's sponsor is Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist for free and save 25% off of a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've also included the link right underneath this video.